Welcome, everyone, to Ecopsychology Voices, an interview series with some of ecopsychology's luminaries. Hello, my name is Carol Koziel, and I'm the founder of the Canadian Ecopsychology Network, the host of the series. Linda Bazal and I co-created this program. Today, Linda is going to be in conversation with Carl Anthony and Paloma Pavel. Carl, Linda, and Paloma, thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom with us today. Linda, the airways are yours.
Thanks, Carol. Well, we're really honored today to have Paloma Pavel and Carl Anthony with us. And we're going to start off, or I'm going to start off just reading a little introduction, and then we'll be in conversation. Since the earliest days of Western ecopsychology, architect and environmental justice activist Carl Anthony has been a pioneer in stressing the importance of connecting the dots between social justice and environmental issues. He's been encouraging our field to really understand the importance of equity in everything we do. Back in 1995, he was interviewed by Theodore Roszak for one of the first ecopsychology textbooks. He said, "The success of ecopsychology will depend not only upon its ability to help us hear the voice of the earth, but to construct a genuinely multicultural self and a global civil society without racism." For decades, Carl Anthony and ecopsychologist and international educator Dr. Paloma Pavel have been doing pioneering work in community ecopsychology with their organization, Breakthrough Communities. They're here to help us understand why it's more important than ever to take a community-wide approach rather than an individual one as the eco-crisis gets worse. In March 2021, Carl and Paloma were both honored with the Thomas Berry Award for continuing the great work of Thomas Berry to enhance the flourishing of the Earth community. So we're so glad to have you with us today. And I understand you have a PowerPoint that you'd like to share with us. Am I getting that right?
Oh, thank you. A little bit into our conversation, we'd like to do that. But right now, we'd like to just take a moment to honor the land and the place where we are. And this is, we are calling from Ohlone Territory, Chochenyo Land Group in what's now called the San Francisco Bay Area. And we want to both honor the great First Nations people who have stewarded this land and know much more, that we have much to learn from for the beauty and sustainability of our future civilization. And Carl, is there anything you'd like to add? And we're going to do a brief libation here.
Well, I would like to, first of all, say that we entered this discussion of ecopsychology at a moment when we were also aware of the fact that our experience as African Americans was not being considered much by anybody. And of course, we've been thinking about this all of our lives, being, for me, being African American. And then we subsequently learned continuously that there were many other people who also needed to be, have a space in the sun and to have our attention focused on those. So I would say, if we were going to pour a libation, that I would pour, you know, there's an African tradition, which is to pour the libation before we begin to talk or begin to have a meal, in recognition of the debt that we owe to the earth and the great gratitude that we have to our ancestors. So I'd like to do that, and also express my appreciation, as Paloma has said, the indigenous people, and to realize the experience of African Americans also has had a tragic relationship with indigenous communities in that our ancestors were brought here as slaves, and we also have to honor that. So I pour a libation, pour a drink for the indigenous people and for African, and also for the Europeans who came and many other groups that have been influencing us over the past several years. The Asian Americans, the Pacific Islanders, the Chicano people, and the people from what I was thinking,
And for the future generations.
and for the future generation.
Thank you, Carl. Right, thank you.
Well, thank you both. We'd love to learn more about what it is that you've been doing and what your thoughts are at this point about the whole field of ecopsychology and where we should be focusing.
May I say a word or two?
Sure, Carl, go for it.
The truth of the matter is that we've been working together for 20, 21, 25 years. And at the beginning, when we were talking about many of these issues, I had been very outspoken. And I've also learned to listen to my partner, who is occasionally gets the point in otherwise. And we have a great opportunity to listen to her. And so I want to make sure that we focus our conversation on the things that she has to contribute to this. We normally have done this very often when we have more time and we show a video and emphasize the African American community. But I want to be sure that we, especially since we were in Canada and having to really recognize the fact that the world looks really different from where you sit. And so we're pleased to actually have this opportunity.
Thank you. And I'm just, as I'm looking and taking in the energy from each of you and where you are coming from, we're very excited to be linking various parts of our planet together. And I'd like to begin with some words from one of our books, Random Kindness and Senseless Acts of Beauty. This is an ecopsychology book that tells sort of an eco myth through animal figures that are taken from a scroll called the Chochujiga, which is from the 12th century in Japan, it was a time when people were kept intentionally illiterate, and instead they organized themselves through a picture language using these animals that are inspiring this particular rendering by Mayumi Oda. And this brief expression from Desmond Tutu opens this book, which was written really in response to violence and systemic degradation of the planet. So it starts out, and as we say these words, I guess I'm wanting to offer it as a blessing and an inclusion of each one who is here, that you might hear this as a part of your own heart speaking to you. We are living in an historic moment. We are each called to be part of a great transformation. Our survival as a species, our survival as a species is threatened at this point in time by global warming, by economic meltdown, by this COVID pandemic, many signs of our climate crisis, and an ever-increasing gap between rich and poor. And yet, this threat offers an opportunity to awaken as a beloved and interconnected Earth community. So we're hoping to explore this theme that the crisis itself provides a portal, a doorway, an opportunity, and that some of the communities we've been working with, frontline communities, offer some of our greatest solutions to this, and that each one of us is called at this moment, all hands on deck. This is a moment where every one of us is wanted and needed. And as I'm looking out here and I'm meeting new people, Robbie, Andy, and seeing old friends, Linda, Carol, I just want to say that this is about us and our call in this moment and time to be part of this great transformation that's occurring.
Do you see this as a way to energize the younger generation and give some hope in the face of things like eco-trauma, climate crisis, all of the things that are happening?
Yes, I would like to make the observation that we've had the experience of become conscious of how much trauma there is in the world and how much we have suffered. But I would also like to say that one of the great gifts of our time is that we're learning to see all of the people of the world simultaneously putting in a few words to say, oh yeah, but what about me? And what about we? And how do we fit into the picture? And we are fortunate because as the young people are coming on a different generation and having their voices heard, they also have much more attention to those parts of society that have not been paid attention to much.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we acknowledge the fact that as we talk about ecopsychology, that we're talking about the experience of many different kinds of people, and their experiences are really much relevant to our solutions as we had been coming to think of mostly the Western tradition and its wisdom, but acknowledging now that we are not only dealing with indigenous people and African people and Asian Americans and people from the Philippines and the Latinx and all of the people, and also the experience of gender has been, we've been forced to really pay much more attention to its messages, and many people, I'm sure, can speak a great deal to us about that. So we're talking with a new generation, but we're also talking with a new generation that is aware of a larger human community, and more than a human community, the world beyond the human community, which was one of Thomas Berry's basic ideas of his book on the universe story, is that we need to understand that each one of us has the parts that come all the way back to the beginning of the Big Bang that created the elements and the opportunities that we have to explore.
Sometimes we say we're 14.7 billion years old, and it's time to act our age. And that we're coming through this together. And in terms of the young people, we like to think of hope not as a noun, but as a verb. That hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. That hope is not something that exists in some abstract way, but it is something that we create through our engagement and through our actions and our activation in the movements. And we like to think of this as kind of three stories. There's a story of me that begins to be activated. There's a story of we, that as we locate ourselves in the local communities that we're a part of, in the families, in the neighborhoods, in the issues that are affecting us each in our own local communities. This story of me is something that gets rooted and grounded. The second story is the story of we, that there's no way that even by our very breath, that as we are breathing in, the trees are breathing out. the plankton. We are in this symbiotic relationship to all of life. And so the story of we begins with our own breath and body and our interconnection to all of life. It's also every one of us has that genetic code in our own gonads that links us back to the first Big Bang, first flaring forth, the stardust. We are stardust in our bones, and we find this a liberatory thing. And this is a we, that we are here as part of the first initial flaring forth that occurred. This is the dance that has emerged out of that. And then the third story that we find important to locate ourselves in right now is the story of the world we share. That we're finding COVID is humbling us, and we're seeing that our interconnectedness with all life is really being demonstrated in such powerful ways, both through the pandemic, but also here in California, we have forest fires that are taking on, there are island nations that are going underwater. So
and under oil too.
And the oil, yeah, we just this last week had a largest oil accident off the coast of Southern California. So these three stories are a way that we begin when partnering with new communities. And we love, if we were going to have a couple days together, which we'd love to have with each of you, we would take time telling our stories, locating ourselves in this place and time.
I think it's really important to realize that our stories are really complete. That is actually the stories that make up our world is really inclusive, but we must actually begin to learn to have the habit of becoming more conscious of each of our stories. And I think that for many of us, it's very important for us to both reach out to the people, and particularly the communities of color that have not been included. But I also would say that it's even at least as important, or even more important, to realize that the story of me is something that hasn't been told much. That you think of movie stars or people who are in the news, or we think about them a great deal, but we also, and of course now that we're dealing with Facebook, we have to think about all that. But the story of me, the story of where we each came from, the very forces that have shaped our world, we need to actually have the habit of bringing much more strength and diversity from our own experience as we reach out to really see the great gift that has been given to us by having all the other forces and personalities in the world, including the animals and the trees and the mountains and so forth, as part of our story.
Oh yeah, I think that's really important that we make that shift. I think you've written a little bit about how in ecopsychology, sometimes we focused on the ecological self and not the multicultural self. Can you say something about how we need to make that transition? Is that part of this me to we that you're talking about?
I think that that's really true. And one of the important things to realize is that, we can't really think about the story of we without thinking of the multicultural self, because we have each of us has many selves, and the selves are trying to get us a little bit of space to be seen, a little bit of sunlight put on what each individual self. But we also realize that that effort is really kind of it goes beyond the people who are in the room and the people who are in our local communities to awareness of people whose lives that we are touching, even though they're not present in our consciousness. And the more that we can become conscious of the multicultural self, the more authentic the view of the ecological self will be. So it's really important not to think of multicultural as being a conflict with the ecological self, but we also have many different ecologies that we're talking about.
Right. Paloma, did you want to add to that?
Thank you. I would say one of the things that for me is really exciting about our movements right now, the climate movement is really becoming the climate justice movement. And I'm remembering, Carl, just a brief story might be useful to kind of help to share a little bit about that. When we had the opportunity to go to the UN and the climate march in New York, we gathered on a train that went across the United States, and people gathered. Some people came from Canada, actually, and began with the train in Berkeley. And then the train went across through Chicago to New York for the largest climate march in the history of the world. And when that began, we had a multicultural group, but we were in literally a kind of spatial apartheid. Many of the younger people and youth of color did not have sleeper units on the train. They were sitting upright and cooking meals on the microwaves in the aisles of the train, and people joined us as we went along the train. So our group grew, but we began. Carl actually launched the kind of learning community aboard the train with a story about the history of the environmental justice and climate justice movements. And it was quite igniting. People really took it to heart, including the folks who were working on the train, the Pullman Porter descendants, who were most majority people of color on the train. So what we noticed was that there was a kind of spatial apartheid among youth of color and older white environmentalists who were sleeping in beds. And there also was a discussion about how to use the space on the train, who got to use the space. So we became a kind of microcosm as we traveled. And so that journey heated up, and it actually reached a kind of flint point where it looked like there was going to be a large conflict in the group. And so when we got to Chicago, we had a layover, and we put our backpacks around in a circle, made arrangements with security at Union Station in Chicago. And we created 2 listening circles of a multiracial, multicultural, intergenerational sort to really hear one another deeply about the issues of privilege and who's taking up the airways, who's taking up the space, whose issues matter, just use of sound and music, etc. And as we began hearing one another, and we began by listening to the youth of color starting the conversation, and there were tears, there was anger, there was a lot of emotion involved with it. And what we came to as a result of that several hours of being there, sitting on the ground in the middle of the train station, is a new understanding, a new hearing of one another. And we actually changed our name from the climate train to the climate justice train as we left there. And there were several songs that were written about that transformation that occurred, hearing one another deeply. And as we came into Penn Station, we actually sang these songs together. I think it was in the middle of the night, but we were full of energy and proud of ourselves that we had actually overcome something and transformed something, and we're on a journey. Not that there wouldn't be future iterations and ongoing work to do, but some fundamental shift had happened. And when I think in my mind of an iconic moment, I think of that intergenerational cross race conversation that happened in circles, sitting in among our backpacks, and it was heavy. It was heavy, and we got through it together.
Wow, that's a powerful and inspiring story. Can you tell us a little more about breakthrough communities and how you've been putting all of this into practice? How long has it existed now?
Thank you. Carl, do you want to?
Well, I would say that you asked the question of how long it existed, and the really question of, well, how long have been people making breakthroughs? And that's been a long time, but we also have our own lives to give this shape to the movement. And Dr. Pavel has a story about how she grew up. And, one of the things that when we have an opportunity to talk about all these things, some things stand out. As, for example, when Dr. Pavel was starting a conference center in Maine, she lived without electricity and the conveniences of the modern world for a period of about 7 or 10 years. Wasn't that it?
7 years without electricity or running water.
So that's a pretty amazing thing. And, that it was an experience that we went to a prison to a group of people who had been in prison in Los Angeles, and they were absolutely riveted by it. You mean you actually live without electricity? So we forget very often how much we had taken for granted, just as we may be taking for granted this week about Facebook and how we're going to live without Facebook. And it's kind of startling to realize that we've been doing that for 13.7 billion years, and we'll probably have many new inventions beyond what we're dealing with right now.
We did work for about 10 years when Carl was at the Ford Foundation with community groups across the country and listening deeply to them in that same way that we did in that microcosm in Union Station in Chicago, so that our book, Breakthrough Communities, grows out of a kind of ground truthing of bottom-up strategies from working alongside community groups and really listening and learning from them, which led to a model that we call the compass. It's a 5-stage theory. And the first stage, and I guess we could maybe just share a little bit about how we've been applying this in the Bay Area with climate crisis and climate justice, and had a kind of breakthrough with that. But we think about the breakthrough communities being maybe defined, if we could say that, or encouraged by the model of 5 stages. And the first one is to become a breakthrough community, or to pursue that. It starts with waking up. What are we waking up to? And this is an ongoing learning. We're waking up to a lot right now with our interconnectedness as a COVID planet. So what are we waking up to? We're waking up to a lot about extraction and fossil fuel dependency. So we're waking up here in the Bay Area to the preciousness of our air and fires, and what it means when we can't go outside for days at a time and breathe. So I would ask you to maybe, as we talk about these 5 stages, think about maybe where you are in your community and try it on. So stage 1 is waking up. And in this movement, part of what we've also been waking up to is that the face of climate change for many of our inner cities communities is not a polar bear on ice. The face that speaks to them is inner city asthma, health rates, impacts. We have teachers that say, 5 years ago, I had 3 inhalers in my top drawer. Now I have 27. That's it, Cancer Alley here in Richmond, elementary schools. So that is a way to wake up to what climate needs in this time. The next is the stage of saying no. Many of the communities that we work with, we come into the climate crisis and ecopsychological regeneration through taking a stand and saying no to something that is unacceptable. And here in the Bay Area, Carl, I don't know if you want to talk about in the 6 Winds what we said no to.
Well, I think this question of saying no, which has been the experience to a large extent of many communities of color since the founding of the U.S. and since before, that we appreciate the really great value of the constitutional traditions and so forth. But we also know that we haven't gotten the full benefit from those communities. And so we have much to say no about. In the Bay Area, we were very much involved with the effort of SB 375, which is to try to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. And much of the pollution that was being dealt with was from our everyday dealing with automobiles, which is how we get around. And we had to really think through how can we sort of rearrange this this transportation system so that we would be able to be not so dependent on the automobiles, which is a great convenience, but that exhale is really pretty hard to breathe in many cases. And then, of course, that's reinforced by the pollution that comes from many of our industries. In Richmond, for example, and the Chevron plant in Richmond really spews out the pollution to the many people, even though they've actually done a great deal to clean up the air, and by getting refining of the automobile use of gasoline, the terrible experiences actually go on to those neighborhoods that are not that far away from Chevron, where many other people.
I'm thinking of Davila, Carl, Davila Irvin, who was a young youth leader in West Oakland. And when we started our campaign in the Bay Area, one of the things that we had to say no to was not only fossil fuels and how do we re-up our investment in public transit, because one of the largest contributors to fossil fuel, light trucks and cars in the Bay Area. And so our first step was meeting as a community and looking at what it is that we're saying no to as a community. And I remember the meeting in West Oakland where Davila Irvin, a young Black man, came, and he was interested, and he realized in that meeting that his sister, who had had 2 asthma attacks, was actually being affected by the fossil fuel and the trucks that were hovering at the port right beside his house, that what they called dirty diesel. The idling of trucks at the port side was exacerbating the air pollution in his community. And so he came on board, and as he began getting involved and getting grounded, that's the next stage, stage 3, getting grounded, he began learning about the science of climate and becoming involved in how to actually be present, spokesperson training, and became a youth leader in this movement. That was stage 3 in the compass, getting grounded in both the science as well as the policies. He ended up actually being a great spokesperson against the airport connector, which stopped a short distance overhead train that would have linked rich communities to the airport, but passed through poor communities, not benefiting them at all. So the airport connector was redirected, and $190 billion worth of funding was redirected through the efforts that Davila Irvin had. And a surprising ally came forward, and a beautiful relationship came forward as we moved to the next stage, which is exploring new horizons. So as the community groups in West Oakland and throughout the Bay Area started uniting around a climate action plan that would represent the community, they brought in a university ally, which was a graduate student in transportation study at that time, Alex Karner. And he came to the first meeting. He was rather shy, a bit of a, I guess, classic nerd, maybe I could say, to use a technical term. And when he spoke, the community glazed over. And Davila pulled him aside and said, "Alex, we love you, man. We love what you know. You've got what it takes, but you're going to have to listen to us, and we'll coach you, we'll teach you." And so Alex Karner became dear friends with Davila. Davila took him on a community tour, Toxics tour, helped him learn how to listen to the community first and not lead with the stats and the technical language, but to actually listen and translate that. And Alex took the lesson, and it actually transformed the way the operation happened. Alex provided the technical background. Davila was one of the prime youth leaders and we moved to stage 5, which was yes, getting to yes. And at that point, do you want to take us to that breakthrough day? Because this is really the story of how a breakthrough community happened here in the Bay Area in relation to climate justice.
So I think it's really important to emphasize the 5 stages. And before I tell you the story of what happened at the end, and of course it's continuing many years since then, but I think it's really important to reiterate what the 5 stages are. And would you do that?
Okay, so as we do this, think of something in your own community. So the first is waking up. What are you waking up to? Waking up to, and you might, I see people reaching for paper, write it down, draw a picture of it, think about it in your own heart and mind. So what are you waking up to? Next is saying no. And we have a picture of this that we might be able to pull up here before we close. And the next was what you're saying no to, because it's important to know what you're taking a stand with and being clear on that. The next is what you're getting grounded in. And we think of the compass, the bottom of the compass, what you're getting grounded in. The next is what you're reaching for. What are the new horizons that are beyond what you've already thought about? This might be new allies, like how the Davila and the community invited Alex to be a new ally. It might be new ways of thinking about something. It might be actually bringing someone in that you previously thought was your enemy in an issue, but seeing that they're actually someone that stands to gain and win by the issue that you're dealing with. And then finally, it's getting to yes. How do you say yes? Because it's not enough to know what you're against, but also, and this is one of the biggest long-term sustainability strategies that we've found in breakthrough communities, is that they know what they're saying yes to. What is the inspiration that will bring more people into the tent with you and also move you into action for the long run. It also spans cultures, it spans age groups. When you have an inspiring yes that really helps people to see what is the future that you're reaching for.
So I'd like to just mention what the outcome of this proposal is and has been. We called it the 6 wins, and we realized that the people who were in the that were talking with each other were really different than the many other people who came to the initial meetings of the transportation agency. And what happened was these people were kind of not feeling that enthusiastic about cleaning up the air because they had so many other things that they had to be concerned about. And we realized that there were some people who were concerned about the health, and some were concerned about having places they could play, and some people were interested in the housing and so forth. So that we
Affordable housing.
Affordable housing. And we realized that actually all of these things were represented ways of saying yes, and that we were looking for a plan that would reduce the CO2 emissions. And there was one particular night after, I think we've been at this for maybe 3 years, working with people in neighborhoods and communities. And we had developed a plan which really rose up from the neighborhoods and the communities. And this was kind of getting the short shrift of established groups. And suddenly one of the supervisors said, you know, I think we should really throw out the 6 different alternatives that were being developed by the transportation agency and include the 6 wins as one of the opportunities that people should be looking at. And then the second supervisor from a different county, a different part of the county, said, I would really like to propose that we actually make this a unanimous decision. And we were all kind of surprised at this. The agency decided to actually, for a change, listen to the people. And so they threw out one of the alternatives that had been developed. And of course, we were really enthusiastic about that. But the most important thing, I think it happened was we had to go through a process of environmental analysis, and turned out that the alternative that we had developed with many hundreds of people in many different neighborhoods and communities, each of which have their own problems. When the plan was put together for 98 jurisdictions and millions of people, it turned out that the solution that we had evolved for the people that we've been meeting with was a many headed solution. The environmental improvement, the assessment was that this actually alternative turned out to be the most efficient of all of the considerations that were being made at the time.
So a people's plan was put forward as one of the 9 county climate action plans that would be considered. And instead of the people being bypassed, the very plan that the community put forward was tested alongside of 5 other technical plans. And that night, having that community plan, which was made stronger and more robust by Alex Carner, the graduate student, and the community input, which was led by Davila Irvin in school at that time. And the 2 of them really represented and embodied the Black, white, and multiracial coalitions that had been formed and succeeded. And that night, people poured into the streets as though we had won the World Cup soccer. to even have it considered. But as it turned out, 3 months later, when they tested all the plans, it turned out that the community plan was also scientifically and technically superior to the technical plans that had been developed by the professionals. And that made a way to reduce CO2 emissions over time as part of while providing equity and social justice components. So it showed that equity actually won out technically as well as culturally and socially. And I think when we think about eco-psychology going forward, that's what it looks like. It's happening in our urban communities, in our rural communities. It's happening by cross generations and cross race coalitions taking place, and finding what we're not only opposed to, but what we're also saying yes to, and including the technical as well as the arts and culture and music and the songs. We need the songs. So I guess that's maybe a place to open it up and hear more from everybody that's here today.
Oh, that's great. That's really inspiring. We just have about 10 minutes left. So yes, if anybody has any questions.